Agile, lean, design thinking, design sprints, agile sprints, Kanban, Scrum. There's no wonder that people are so confused. In this video, I'm going to be talking about each of these different approaches and methodologies and try to help you figure out the best approach for your organization. Okay, where to start? It's a tough one, really. But I think the best thing to do is understand, firstly, what Agile is, what Lean is, and what design thinking is, and the differences between these three methodologies, approaches, frameworks, if you like. There are similarities, but there are definitely differences as well, and there's so much confusion about each of these. So let's first look at Agile. Now, Agile's been around for 20 or 30 years now and was created, or the principles were created by a group of people that came together because they wanted to create software and create products in a different way. And they created the Agile Manifesto, which was a list of 12 principles which anyone who's practicing Agile must adhere to. But I won't go into too much detail on what these principles were. Agile itself is really a collection of different rituals and behaviors that you want people to go through in order to create the best software that they can. Sometimes people think of Agile as being a cheaper approach. Sometimes people think of it as a quicker approach. Sometimes people think of it as a better approach. And Agile can definitely lead towards all of those three goals. But Agile is particularly good at making sure you're building the product in the right way and building the right product. And Agile is about iterations, constant iterations, and short cycles of work. These short cycles of work we often call sprints. So when people talk about an Agile sprint, and I guess more often when they talk more about sprints in general, then sprints are generally chunks of work that you put into 1 week, 2 week, or even up to 6 week blocks of work. Each one of those blocks has got a series of smaller steps that developers, designers, and product managers generally go through in order to refine the product and make sure they're building the right thing. Agile has a number of different styles, flavors, if you like. One that became very popular was Scrum, and Jeff Sutherland was one of those key kind of founders of Agile. He was a part of the group that came up with the Agile Manifesto, and he started to work in Scrum, wrote a book all about the art of doing twice the work in half the time. So that real focus on productivity, on shipping, is a really key part of Agile. Scrum is about having small team sizes, breaking down problems into small short-term goals and packaging that into sprints. And then there's often these rituals that happen as well. Daily stand-ups you may have seen and may have heard of, retrospectives, shipping meetings, getting deployment out there and stuff like this as well. So Agile is a methodology and approach for how to work and how to create software. That's a very quick snapshot on Agile. What I'm going to come to now is Lean, because Lean, it's an easy one to confuse with Agile, because Lean is very much about constantly innovating and creating really successful businesses. Now, Lean, probably one of the most familiar and popular tools, if you like, around Lean is the build, measure, learn cycle. So this is where you build something, you get it out there into the world, you measure something about it, whether it's going to be successful, etc., and then you learn what you can in order to go through to the next cycle. One of the other principles is about building MVPs, minimum viable products. And the key thing with Lean that differentiates Lean for me and Agile is that Lean often is a bit more towards the beginning of your projects. It's when you're a bit uncertain about what it is you want to do, you want to validate it, you want to go through experiments to figure out whether the thing you're building is actually going to work. It's very much focused on those early stage products. And the MVP is very different to something which is in full production mode. I see Agile as being at the stage where you've got something has had that early interest, early indications of it working, and you can go through the Agile principles, ways of working operationally, that kind of thing, to make sure that it's going to have long-term success. constant iteration, constant feedback loops, and just working in a very agile way, being responsive to where the market is and where your audience is going. But if you want to validate a product much earlier, then lean is probably the way to go. So lean really sits at that point when you've got an idea, you want to validate it quickly, you want to get an MVP out as quickly as possible, you want to measure its success and learn as much as you can based on those kind of hypotheses that you've got of the MVP. Now, if we go even further back, before you've even got an idea of what your MVP is, this really is where design thinking comes in. And this was popularized by IDEO and a bunch of other kind of innovation consultants, again, 20, 30 years ago. So it's not new stuff, but it is becoming very popular and very talked about. Now, I don't have Tim Brown's book. I've lent it out to somebody because that's a really great book about design thinking. But this is also really excellent, the Design Thinking Playbook. This is all about how to actually put design thinking into practice. But quickly, what design thinking is, it's often seen as a process for innovation. It's got a 5-stage process. If you Google it, you'll see this every time. You've got empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And those 5 stages, often people think that that's all design thinking is, but for me it's way more than that. Design thinking is a mindset, it's an approach to solving big problems, and design thinking is very much at that stage of a product development, of figuring out whether the problem exists, whether the solutions that you're coming up with, the ideas that you're coming up with might work in the real world, and just testing and getting into that mindset of experimentation constantly. Design thinking really fits in that place where you've got no idea what the MVP might be even. You don't know what prototype to build. You certainly don't know what this software is going to look like. You don't even know whether your potential users would want to use some kind of tool. You don't know even if they've got the right, you're solving the right problem yet. And design thinking is this mindset of constant experimentation, constantly talking to your potential users, to clients, to potential customers, to figure out what those problems are and whether the solutions that you're coming up with could actually work for them. Now, design thinking, again, it's that mindset, very early stage, but it can continue throughout a broader life cycle of a product. So what I often think about is design thinking is great for coming up with new ideas, very new ideas, completely new innovations and brand new products, but also really good for iterating, for building out new features, for understanding what features you should prioritize. Design thinking approaches can be really good for that as well. Now, another thing that I want to throw in is the design sprint. Now, a design sprint is different from an agile sprint. It gets confusing, I know, so sorry. Now, the design sprint is all about how to solve big problems and test new ideas in just 5 days. I see it as a more strict approach to or implementation of design thinking in a very short space of time. Design thinking often is amazing at generating really good research, but sometimes you don't get to the tangible prototype because you can end up in this never-ending kind of cycle of research and talking to customers. Design sprints are really good at cutting through all of that to create a prototype rapidly and test it as quickly as you possibly can. Okay, bit of a pause because I've just thrown loads of big terminology at you, loads of different things that might be really confusing. As a quick recap, let's go from sequential order. Get doing design thinking at the beginning of your product and projects. Perhaps use something like a design sprint framework in order to rapidly come up with a prototype and test that really quickly. Once you've got an idea of where you are going with the prototype, you might want to start building or start thinking about building an MVP. Once you've got some of those hypotheses validated, once you know broadly that something that you could build might work, then you go into lean startup cycles, build, measure, learn, build your MVP, continue to build MVPs. I know there's a lot of people that don't like the word MVP because you should be in this constant mode of experimentation and having lots of different experiments running in order to validate specific hypotheses. MVP is often a catch-all for anything which you're a bit uncertain of, and there are so many flaws with the way that people build MVPs, but that's probably another video. Once you've got the idea, once you know what your problem is going to be that you're going to try and solve, once you get into these lean startup kind of approaches to build, measure, learn, to constantly learn things, then it's time to move into kind of your agile approaches, agile methodologies. This is about, again, teamwork, collaboration, really good productivity, trying to get through the work as quickly as possible, but also to make sure that you're building the right things, not just the things right. Wow. Okay. Now, a lot of organizations are trying to implement Agile or trying to implement design thinking or lean, and they might have different teams that are trying to do the same things. And so they ask, how can we reconcile and work all of these things together so that it all works for the whole company? And that can be a real challenge if you're trying to be specific about the approach or the methodology that you're using. I look at these tools as tools, not rules. It means that you don't have to follow a specific route, a specific methodology or approach. Taking a little bit from each of them is definitely a really great approach to go for. If you're creating software, then Agile is definitely great, but look at the different versions of Agile. I talked a little tiny bit about Scrum, but there's things like Kanban as well, which is a slightly more free kind of expression of Agile. And that can work really well. Think about the small steps that you need to take in order to become more agile. Less about the kind of agile with a capital A, more agility is a really important thing. But you can take your retrospectives, for example. That's something that I would absolutely focus on. Retrospectives being reviewing how you work together. What went well? How did we work? What went badly? Not what did we ship and how was the success of the product, but how did we work together in order to overcome some of the challenges that we've got. Retrospectives are something that I would definitely be doing across all of these different frameworks. Working in short cycles, absolutely, 100%. Do that at every opportunity. Really reduce the size of what you're trying to do into something which is small and manageable, and you can get into the hands of users as quickly as possible. That brings me on to the third part here, which is put customers at the center of everything. Another word for design thinking, or another expression for design thinking, is human-centered design. Human-centered everything, human-centered organizations is what we should be thinking about much more. Rather than thinking about only talking to customers when you're doing a design thinking approach, think about how to talk to customers at every single stage of the journey. You should be talking to customers as often as you can. The other thing is get out of the building, so to speak. This is something that Steve Blank talks about a lot. Get out, see the teams that you've got, see what's going on in the wider world, see how people are actually using your products once it's out there. Get out there. Don't just talk to them, but see it live, see it for real. Get out of the building and try and find out what's going on. Now, at the end of the day, your customers, your users, your clients, they don't care whether you're agile, lean, using design thinking practices. They don't care about any of that. What they care about is that the product is brilliant and it solves their problem. Now, so any of these that work for you are fantastic. That's what you should be focusing on. Okay, that video was a little bit longer than I'd hoped it to be, but hopefully it's been high value. This is just a small amount of detail that we've got in each of these different concepts. So I'm going to try to do more videos about each of them just to really fully understand how you can take little bits from each in order to make great products that people love and that solve meaningful problems for people. Now, if you did like this video, as I say, I'm going to be making a load more. Please subscribe. Give us a comment as well. And don't forget to click that notification button so that you get the latest videos as quickly as possible and you can go and check them out. That's all for now, and I'll see you next time.